My name is Max, as Karan already introduced me. And I am a trainer and resident colorist at Maxon. And at Maxon, I run a show called Max on Color. Well, surprise, surprise. And today we're going to talk a little bit about color grading. So if you have been creating content in the last couple of years, you probably, stumble upon the term or the discipline of color grading, aren't you? So it's a process to, master your image to make a perfect and beautiful imagery from your projects, right? Sometimes, though, when you are starting color grading, things can be like very complicated and very misleading. And I remember my journey when back in the day starting in color grading. I feel like, what should I do? There are so many buttons. Which buttons should I push? And what is the correct way to do that? And today we're just going to talk about that. But if we are going to the title of the presentations today will be just about creating a versatile look or crafting looks versatile. I'm sorry, bad joke. Um, why though? Why creating versatile looks? Why is it important? I hope we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna explore about that further later down the road, right? So, if you ever do color grading, let me just make it full screen. If you ever do color grading, I remember my story when I'm sorry, it's like a share because, sharing is caring. I remember my journey when I am starting out as a colorist back in the day. So I feel that I really don't know what I'm doing, but I have all this button. Maybe I can just like eyeing it out and ball it until I got it, right? So those are like the pretty much the old approach that I used to do. I see like there's one clip, color correct it, color grade it, make it until it looks good, apply a look, move to another clip, and do it exactly the same thing over and over again. Copy and paste, copy and paste, copy and paste. It could be great because you got to spend the most of your time in one clip and make them look beautiful. But what if you have 15 minutes clips? Do you want to spend the whole weeks to do that? Well, let me show you in practice how that approach may looks like, right? So here, I have a timeline, a really short timeline, just about somebody playing bowling, all right? So in the old days, when I'm starting grading, what I would do is normally I'll pick a hero image. It's normally a wide angle image where I can see my environment, I can see my subject, and then I start eyeing it out. So back in the day when I want to start it at that, probably, okay, I know that this is log image is very flat and desaturated, so probably I need to add contrast and add saturations and make them look beautiful. So probably what I'm gonna do is that add contrast a little bit, perhaps play around with the gamma and the saturations, and perhaps after that create another node and okay, I want to make it looks beautiful. Maybe add a look on top of it. Let's add MagicBullet Looks. Because I have MagicBullet Looks, it definitely can make things looks beautiful. So I know that this is a footage that coming from Ari Alexa. More about that later. Same as input. So I'll just create some looks. And if that would be like, okay, acceptable, I will move to another clip and repeat the same process. But that would be like very demanding if you have like at least just 15 minutes clips. Because it takes so much time out of your time. The other way to do that back then is through the utilizations of LUT or lookup table, right? So if I just reset everything, another way to do that is that I'm using the lookup table that comes from the camera manufacturers. which is like scientifically accurate because it is according to their image science. So what I'm going to do is that, all right, perhaps I will just apply a lookup table, and this is a lookup table that coming from ARI, that transform from ARI Loxy to ARI to Rec 709, right? And then after that, instead of working after the LUT, I need to work prior to the LUT. So why is that? Why is that? Bear in mind, we're still in the old approach. So just imagine if you are going to create anything, to adjust anything after the LUT, and then after that, like for example here, I reduce my exposure after the LUT, and then bring up my exposure again. You'll see that I have a clipping in the waveform, if you see that. And those are the things that I won't be able to rescue. But for example, if the same approach, the same adjustment done prior to the LUT, look at that. How different is that? So probably what I'm going to do is that from now on, I will apply the LUT, I will adjust the contrast, adjust the saturations, create the look, and go to another clip and repeat that again. That's boring. You got to spend your time in this most technical part where you can just actually focus on the very fun part, creating the looks itself. Right. So back to my presentations. Right. What if we change our way of thinking a little bit and thinks of a new approach, a newer and better approach? What if there is a newer and better approach that we can use to just perhaps create looks for the whole timeline, and then after that, just just do a balance within clip level, only for the clips, to make them cohesive. So the benefit of this approach is that you will have a cohesive looks because you are developing a look that is applied to the entire clip on the timeline, and then you just do color grading under it to make it works, right? So, and if you have different scenes, you can just go per scenes and tweak it to make it sings with the scenes, right? This approach has its own kinks. It has its own demands. I think if you want to use this approach, you need to at least understand just slightly, just a little bit of color science. And it's not that you need to understand the full-blown of color science. There are minimum requirements, so to say, and just understand a practical color science, right? And if you don't want to, you can always just hang out with people who knows color science, and they will tell you what to do, right? Outsource. And the journey of understanding practical color science can be started by having a good understanding of color space. So what is a color space? There's a huge questions among the creative people out there, right? So color space, in its simplest definitions, is a specific, measurable, and fixed set of range of colors and luminance values that can be accurately represented in any digital or analog system. So bear with me that I mentioned two different stuff there, a specific range of colors and luminance value. It kind of reveals the secret ingredients of color space itself. And color space is actually consists of color gamut and tone curve. So any color space must have color gamut and tone curve. So color gamut refers to the colors that a specific color space can represent. It defines the boundaries of color and help us to visualize what is possible and what is the limitations within a given space. And tone curve is quite the opposite. It is the representations of how brightness values are distributed on that particular color space, and it plays important role in shaping the overall contrast of our images and the tonality of our images. right? But there could be like plenty of like different color space out there. And is there a way for you to categorize them to make it easier? And yes, if you are interested to color grading, at least you just need to understand these three different stuff, different color space. Your camera or your output or your source color space, your intermediate or your working color space, and your output color space. The camera color space or the source color space is the color space where your image was shot in or where your render was rendered in. And your display color space is like the final color space where your image is going to be viewed. This could be your computer screen, this could be your phone screen, this could be a TV, cinema, anything, or this projector. And the working color space is that your specific choice or the intermediate color space where you want to do your adjustment. And that's the minimum requirement of this new approach when you want to create a look that can be applied onto many different variety of projects. So let me show you the hands-on approach on that. Okay, same timeline, right? So what's nice with DaVinci Resolve is that by default, let me go back into my presentations again. By default, if you have a timeline and if you don't do any groupings, and if you see somewhere over there, you only have 2 dots. And that is only representing the clip level and the timeline level. So anytime you do any adjustment in your timeline, it will be applied onto the whole clips in your timeline, right? As you can see here, I added red in my timeline, and it will be applied to the whole timeline. And the clip level, if I just apply anything in the clip level, it will just be applied onto that clip. So if you group your clips accordingly, and this can be done by grouping per camera source or grouping per whatever you want, but my personal choice is to group it via scenes. Because, you know, if you group it per scenes, you can target all different clips that belongs to same scenes. So again, you are working to create a cohesive looks. So when you are grouping them, you have 2 extra groups, the group pre-clip and the group post-clip. So the group pre-clip and post-clip, anytime you do any adjustment on that category, the adjustment will be carried out, will take an effects onto the clips that belong to the same groups only. So now let's play around a little bit with the new approach. So before we jump into creating the looks, like I said before, we just need to know a bare minimum understanding of color science. And what I'm going to do is that I want to transform my image into the same universal working space. So I know at the moment it kind of like, that doesn't make any sense because everything is coming from the same camera. This is Arri Loxi. Why would you? Well, I would argue that I like, if you ever like familiarize yourself with one specific color space, your tools will behave in certain ways. And if you familiarize yourself with that color space, you kind of like building a muscle memory, and you know your contrast adjustment, you know this and that. Repeatability, that's the word, right? So in this case, my color space of choice to tackle my adjustment is in Asus. So what I'm going to do is that in the group pre-clip, I will apply the plugins that is called Asus Transform. So in here, if I enable it, I will inform the framework that, I will inform the plugin that this is an image coming from Arri Loxi, Arri White Gamut, Arri Loxi Color Space and Tone Curve. And I want to transform it into Asus AP1 with Asus CCT Tone Curve. So that's what I did. And it changed from this image into even more flatter image. It's like, Max, are you crazy? What are you doing? But bear with me, because on the timeline level, what I'm gonna do is that I did the opposite. So I am applying the same plugins, but instead of going from Ariloxy to Asusicity, I'm going from Asusicity, my intermediate, my working color space, into my display color space, my target color space. And in this case, I want to target Rec 709, so that's my choice over there, Rec 709. And simply just by doing that, I can normalize the whole entire image in my timeline easily, right? Except for this one, because it belongs to different group. So I haven't enabled the input transform. There you go. Now we're up into a very good starting point. So let me choose my hero image again, and let us create a looks that we can apply onto this project. So in creating the looks, using MagicBullet Looks. And MagicBullet Looks is a plugin from Red Giant that helps you to simplify the process of looks creations. Let me launch MagicBullet Looks. What's nice with MagicBullet Looks is that it is available in many different host apps. So you can use it in DaVinci Resolve, you can use it in Premiere Pro, you can use it in Final Cut Pro, you can use it everywhere, even in Cinema 4D and in Unreal Engine. So once you get to know MagicBullet Looks in one applications, you can repeat it anywhere else, right? So just to walk you through a little bit about MagicBullet Looks, the interview is very simple. Right at the bottom, you have the looks drawer, and if you press L, it will open and close the looks drawer, the preset drawer. And by the way, there are plenty of presets that shipped with MagicBullet Looks. I think it's over 300. And recently, we just released a new presets. So there are 38 new presets that is based on film emulations. So if you like to do film emulations, if you like to start your grade with film emulations, there is a very good film emulations presets. And if you just want to get a quick fix and I want to have a specific looks that emulate the look of a blockbuster movies, you can go to Silver Screen. Those are the new presets. I think you probably know already if you're reading Dreamhouse, what probably the movie is, or Euphoric, or May the 4th, you know, right? And the other new presets are based on music videos. So we have 6 new presets on music videos. And the last but not least is the utility. That is to soften your highlights and to create a vintage detuned lenses looks, right? So that's a little bit about the presets. And after the presets, you also have scopes. So for example, if we press S, you'll be opening and closing the scopes. And there are plenty of different scopes. There are 6 of them. And if I'm going to drag the boundaries between my viewport and the scopes, you can really see that the scope is interactively scaled up and down, right? And we have the control panels, C, to open and close it. So once you select a specific tools and you press C, and you'll see that there is the control panels. And the tools panels. And the shortcut for that is T for tools. So there are plenty of tools in the MagicBullet Looks. The first one is the selective tools, which is like the tools that you can emulate the look of any adjustment that you do on the set. Maybe if you are putting a negative fill onto your subject, you can try to emulate that with the tools that are available in the selective tools. The camera tools, mostly like the camera technique and filters, the color correction tools, and the film emulation tools. Right, the 2 special tools that very near and dear to my heart is the optical diffusions and the halations. The optical diffusions and the halations is developed in a respect of a 3D principle called energy conservations. So anytime you push these tools, the exposure levels will not change in your image. So you can go crazy and you know for sure that your exposure will remain intact. That is because these two tools is not generating its own lights. It is taking the available lights in the scenes and then recalculate it and give you back the diffusions or the halations. So the looks that I created here, all right, the heart of this looks is based on a film print emulations. And as you can see here, the film stocks that I choose is Kodak 2383, but I can also choose Fuji 3510. And as you see, I can go like crazy with it, with full power, but instead of doing that, I'll just use it very teeny tiny a little bit. I don't know how it looks in your screen. And after that, I apply a LUT. And this LUT is actually the handcrafted LUT that I did in Resolve. And I bring it into MagicBullet Looks LUT tool using this icon over here. So you can always bring in your LUT into MagicBullet Looks as well. And below that, before the LUT, there is a channel mixer tool to just change the shade of the tint of blue and red that I have. And I have the halations and diffusions. And last but not least, right at the end, I have the renoiser tools. So what's nice about renoiser tools is that you can think of it as a parametric film grain. So let me just put renoiser tools and let us focus somewhere over there. So what the renoiser do is that it creates a virtual grain between your pixels, and based on the parameter that you set here, you can adjust how big the grain is, how dense it is. Do you want to have more grains in the red channel or green channel or blue channel, or do you want to have more grain in the highlight, midtone, or shadow? It's very flexible. But there are also plenty of presets, and that's renoiser. And before renoiser and after renoiser. And as you can see, I just use it very small amount of renoiser. So when we confirm MagicBullet Looks, now we have a look that is applied throughout our timeline, right? But as you can see, Max, that's not finished. It feels like too dark and too, I don't know what's the word, edgy. Maybe you can bring the balance up a little bit. So that's actually reveal like the very important thought process here. That is, creating one looks that works for the entire clips is just one part of the game. The other part is the color grading itself. Looks is not supposed to be a replacement for color grading process, but it is a complementary process to your color grading, right? So it doesn't mean that after you create the looks, you're done, out, finished. You still need to color grade your footage. And in this example, I will show you just a very simple grading that I did using just the primary tools to make the footage looks way much better and works with the looks that I created. So first thing first, what I did is just I adjust the exposure using the HDR exposure tools because it's photometrically accurate. But bear in mind, though, since it is a color space-aware tools, to do that, to be able to make the most of your adjustment using the HDR tool in Resolve, you need to inform the tools what color space you're in and what is your tone curve. And you can do that by clicking these three dots over here. And in this case, the color space of my choice is Asus AP1, and the tone curve is the Asus CCT, right? So by doing that, I will be able to perform a photometrically correct exposure adjustment. So after adjusting the exposure, I adjust my contrast level a little bit, and that is just by doing a very simple contrast adjustment using the contrast and pivot button in the primary tools. And on top of that, I also add the gamma up a little bit, right? So I just bring the midtone of the image slightly up, and I adjust the saturations right at the end, right? And as you can see, the saturations itself, it is a big part of the adjustment. And that is actually not just a simple saturations boosted up. And if you can see, in these saturations, node, what I did is that, as you can see, the saturations remain at 50. There's nothing changed. What I did is that I round trip to a different color space that has a separate saturation channel and just boost the saturations in that color space. So how to do that? Simple. So you can go to that specific node, select color space, and select HSV, because HSV color space stands for the hue, saturations, and value. So you can access just the saturation channel without affecting the hues and the luminance, right? And as you can see, the channel that I have active is just the second channel. And in HSV, the second channel, guess what? It's the saturations, HSV, right? And by increasing the gamma slider in the primary toolbars, now I can target the saturations in the saturation channel, because now lift, gamma, gain become the hue, saturations, and value. Easy. But you may argue, why don't you just use saturations max and just max it out like that? I mean, it depends though. Sometimes it can look great, but I just like to have these separations, to just target the saturations in the saturations, instead of like bringing the luma all together up by increasing the saturation slider. So if you're increasing saturations in the RGB color space, it means that you are adjusting the saturations as well as the brightness of the image, right? So I don't want that. I just want the saturations. So let me delete this. And finally, last but not least, what I did is just balance out the image. And this is like very simple process. And what I did is just I'm playing around with the offset. So let me reset that. It feels like I can add a little bit more blue. And to do that, I will just focus on using the offset wheel, offset tools. And I'll just increase the blue slightly. And I will reduce the red slightly, as that is too much. And just reduce the green slightly. That is a little bit much. So, before, after. And that's actually exactly the same thing that I repeat in the other scenes. Again. So. And again, right? So, and by doing that, by just grading under the look that I created on the timeline level, I can create something that is really cohesive throughout the entire project. But what if I have like a different scene, Max? What if I want to make this outdoor scenes to look slightly different, right? Hang on. So if I enable the grade under it, what I can do is that I can go into the group level, so I can just target that particular clips in that specific scenes, and I can create a different tweaks to the looks that I created. So in this case, I am just using MagicBullet Looks again. And if I launch MagicBullet Looks, you can really see that I'm just using optical diffusions, halations, and color blend to fake the effect to make it as if it is a glow effects and color it red, right? And that's what I did. And as you can see, it's just 15% of the strength. So you don't have to use MagicBullet Looks all the way, 100%, right? So before MagicBullet Looks, after MagicBullet Looks, and then after that, I tweaked it a little bit using just the offset control, same deal like before. And now, if we run through all of this, we can be sure that pretty much we have a cohesive looks on our clips, on our project. Not just our clips, but for the entire clips in our projects. So far, is there any questions? Sounds good? I take it as a no? All right. Next thing, I would like to show you the very same approach. How can you translate this approach when you are grading in Premiere Pro? Are you out of luck? Well, let's see. Let me close DaVinci Resolve. And we have Premiere Pro timeline, exactly the same timeline as before, right? You probably already guessed. He's using adjustment layer. But that's the secret. Just use adjustment layer and put MagicBullet Looks to affect the whole entire clips on your image. So let me enable the adjustment layer. Let me enable MagicBullet Looks. So what I did here in MagicBullet Looks in the adjustment layer, perhaps let me pick the other frame. Right. So what is different here? Before, in Resolve, we are working within Asus framework. So we need to make sure that MagicBullet Looks will need to be able to go from Asus and back out to Asus again. But now in Premiere Pro, with the default project settings, what I'm going to do is that I'm using MagicBullet Looks to go from RE to work in Asus, and the input will be from RE Alexa, here, RE V3 Log C with exposure index of 800, and the output will be Rec 709. So I'm working within Asus framework in MagicBullet Looks, but I'm not spitting out Asus back in my way out. So I'm targeting my display space right at the end and exactly within MagicBullet Looks. And it is exactly the same looks as before. So if I confirm that, I think we are on the same good starting point as before, right? And now, how do you grade that? Because you are not in Asus, and how do you fake this to make it happen? And what you can do is that you can go to the clip and then apply Colorista. And that's what I'm doing there. So, and in Colorista, instead of having the response on video, that's the basic response, basically, the default one, you need to change the response into lock. Because Colorista will take whatever the color space, the clip it is in, and then it will just do adjustment on that, and it will giving you out the, how do you call it, the result. And in this case, when we are working this way, we're not working inside the Asus framework. Our look is, but our grade is done in the camera color space. So what I'm gonna do is just the same thing like before. I can adjust the contrast slightly. Let me reset Colorista. Okay. What I'm gonna do is that set the control response from video to lock. Reset. Change the control response from video to lock. And first thing first, play around with the contrast. That's a little bit too much. Just reduce the contrast slightly. And now what I'm gonna do is that bump up my exposure slightly. There you go. And last but not least, I can saturate my image, add saturations using this HSL wheel. So for example, if I don't want the red to be like very saturated, I can just drag this point to the middle and decrease the saturations of my red. But that's not the effect that I want. I want to make the brighter saturated image a little bit darker. And in order to do that, I will use the second wheel. And if I click this radio button over here, I'll have the detailed adjustment. So what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to drag the red lightness a little bit towards the center. And the blue as well. Something like that. And then I can play around with the saturation equal if I want. And if I want to, I can brighten up my shadow regions as well. So I'll lift my shadow slightly to make the image a little bit more airy. So, and before and after. But remember that we have one looks that is applied to the entire timeline, and that will make the cohesive looks for all your entire image. So that's how you do it in Colorista. Of course, you need to copy and paste Colorista in each and different clips and do exactly the same things again. And that was it. Is there any questions so far? If there's no questions, there's another tricks that I want to show you. Because we're coming to an end, and I just want to show you another tips whenever you want to develop a looks, right? Because normally when you develop a looks, you need to have some guidance, right? Especially if you want to steal a looks. I would say that instead of stealing the looks graphically, taking one image and compare it to another image and work it graphically, try to work onto the photography itself, right? Because most of the looks coming from the photography. And there is such a nice tools inside DaVinci Resolve that you can use to know pretty much like how is the image was shot, how it was done, and how do they do it, and so on and so forth, right? And the tools is not very fancy. It's called false color, right? And you can still use false color. So if you're using false color into any still image that you can get from any internet or screenshot of your favorite movie, for example, this one is from Top Gun that I take from Shot Deck. If I just want to know how is the photography done, roughly, because I know that there is looks on top of that. But if I just want to know how is the photography done, I can still use false color on these images. And to do that, let me just enable this, show compound node. To do that, I can use false color, obviously, but since we know that this is an image that is already in the display space, it's a Rec 709 Gamma 2.4 images. Meanwhile, my color, my false color is requiring Blackmagic 4.6K in film. I can always transform my image, right? So I can always use color space transform onto my Rec 709 image, and then apply the correct input color space. In this case, it's sRGB, and the input gamma is same as RGB. And then I transform it into Blackmagic White Gamut Gen 4 or 5 with Blackmagic Design Gen 5 tone curve. And disable the tone mapping and disable the gamut mapping. And then just by enabling the false color, applying the false color, and change the camera model and the camera mode specifically to what you did in your color space transform, now you can really see that, right, the 50% gray is right on spot on his shirt, and then the skin color, the skin tone is one stop below the 50% gray, and then we have like the near black area on this tires area, and then we hardly clips any highlights because there's no red that you can see in your image, just this gray. And if I disable that, and you can kind of already see how the photography was done on the set, roughly. So, that was it. I hope you learned something today. And if you have any questions and if you want to connect, you can always visit maxon.net/events.